Chapter 9. The Deep End. The floor crunched under Sam's feet. Fedor, Veronique and Joe stood nearby in the flickering shadows. He turned, but the doorway, Reuben and his library were nowhere to be seen. Why am I not surprised? "Where are we?" Joe's voice trilled. They seemed to have entered a large cave. The air was cold and dank. Several long, dark rivets were embedded in the floor. The walls, roughly cut, were lined with metal rings from which wooden torches hissed and spat. Above them, Sam could make out a series of dimly lit ledgers, one on top of the other, running around the chamber and stretching up toward the ceiling. He craned his neck to see how far they reached, and as his eyes adjusted to the dark, he was shocked to see gigantic arms and clawing hands reaching down towards them. A gaping mouth opened wide in an endless roar. Sam pointed until they all stood staring up at the hideous ceiling carving. 3 similar figures adorned the walls. Veronique screwed up her face. Today it would seem she was to be Nicky the Spelunker. Further reverie was cut short by a harsh, grating sound. The floor shook, and Sam stumbled. Stone plugs rose from beneath the rivets, sealing them off. The sculpture above them began to groan, making the deep gurgling sound of a blocked tap, until a stream of liquid erupted from its mouth. "What the hell is going on?" Veronique cried, dashing for cover. Backs pressed against the wall, they stared at the deluge. "A drain," Fedor shouted. "Those holes in the floor must have been a drain." Joe blinked. "He's right, and unless that stops," he indicated the statue, "or the drain's open, this cave is going to fill up." "And we drown," Fedor finished. Sam saw Joe was shaking. What the hell kind of library was this? They stared at the deepening pool in disbelief. "A test," Veronique blurted. "It must be some kind of twisted test." Her hair was matted and mud-splattered. They all cut similar sodden figures, cowering against the wall. Nicky the drowned rat. Sam grabbed a torch. If this was a test, then they'd damn well rise to it. "Look around. If you're right, there will be a clue or some instructions somewhere. If we can get up there," he pointed to the ledgers, "we can buy ourselves some time." Fedor handed a torch to Veronique, who began to scour the walls for clues. The last went to Joe. He needed 2 hands to hold it. "Over here," Joe called a few minutes later. "There's something under here, but it's caked in this He hit the wall. The old plaster sent up dust, but remained in place. "Water," Sam said. "We need to get it wet." "Shirts?" Fedor suggested. "Yes." The pair turned and ran over to the rising pool, ripping off their T-shirts. Veronique pretended to look away when the bare-chested boys ran back. Slapping the material against the wall, they began to scrub. "It's working!" Joe whooped. The crude plaster was coming away in his hands. "Keep going! More here! Here!" Veronique began to claw at the mud too, manicured nails forgotten. The tide was now pooling around their ankles. They soon exposed a mural. Joe traced the relief, lips moving as he translated the instructions. "There's someone pulling a lever, closing the drains. That looks like a reservoir above the cave. It empties here, from the mouth of the statue." Veronique stabbed at the picture of the gigantic reservoir. "It's bigger than this cave." "We have to get that drain open," Sam shouted. "Or stop the water," Fedor said. "You're both right," Joe said. "Look, this figure is placing something into the side of the statue that seems to stop the water and open the drain." Sam peered over the boy's shoulder. "But what?" "There!" Veronique patted a smudged section. They're climbing onto those ledges, but how do we get up there? They're so high. Well, Sam paused. What if we wait for the water to rise and float up? Fedor nodded. Guys, Joe sounded worried as he cleaned another section of the mural. I don't think we can do that. Look. The next image showed serpents attacking the figures in the water. Oh my God! Veronique cried. What the hell are those? Sam turned. Let's not stick around to find out. There's nothing else here. Joe rubbed at the wall. That's it. What are we going to do? Not panic, Fedor replied. Sam noticed the bruises on the boy's face and wondered what had happened to him in the hours since they had parted company. Come on, then. He wrung out his ruined shirt. Let's get a move on. The ledge was so high above the cavern floor that neither Sam nor Fedor could brush the bottom of it. Well, that's not going to work, Sam panted, hands on knees. Fedor squatted. Get on my shoulders. They wobbled their way towards the lip of the ledge, but were still too short. Sam swore when Fedor staggered and fell, dumping them both into the water. Sorry, it's my ankle. Had a run-in with a bear yesterday. They all stared. You what now? Joe gawped. I'll tell you about it later. I've an idea, Veronique said. What about making a human pyramid? Sam looked embarrassed. I didn't think of that. Veronique smiled and patted him on the cheek. Well then, you're lucky you have me. Now, on your knees, my minions. As the tallest, Sam and Fedor were at the bottom of the pile, noses in the water, eyes wide as they kept watch for serpents. Joe clambered on top. With 2 nimble leaps, Veronique crested the pyramid and reached for the ledge. Nicky the acrobat. Her heart sank. It was still not high enough. Then she noticed that the stone lip appeared lower to the right. Clambering down, she dragged the boys out of the water and reformed the pyramid. The image of the magician card on her bed came to mind. Embrace your skills. Tap into your full potential. You will be tested. Today, I am Nicky the Victorious. Veronique looked up, bent her knees, and launched herself towards the ledge. Everything slowed down as she jumped, the din of the waterfall becoming a muffled drone. Hands outstretched, legs pedalling, she propelled her body toward the outcrop. Contact. With considerable kicking and wiggling, Nicky the acrobat dragged herself up and onto the ledge. Rolling onto her back, she lay, gasping for breath. Everything hurt. It took a moment for her to catch her breath, so she didn't hear the sound of the hatches in the walls opening. Long, dark shapes glided into the water. Joe's high-pitched scream startled her. Something just brushed my leg! Mine too, Sam shouted, and the boys began to splash about. Veronique, 3 voices screamed. Hurry up! A knotted rope lay coiled a few feet away, and Veronique scrambled toward it. Her stomach twisted when she realized it was not anchored to anything. There were 2 rounded stones at the lip of the ledge, spaced a few feet apart, but they were not large enough to use. Veronique was out of time. Nicky took over. She wrapped the rope around her waist and braced her feet on the stones, throwing the length over the side. Send Joe up first! The rope jerked, nearly pulling her over. She leaned back and let out a cry, the rough twine fighting her grip and tearing her hands. The pain was almost unbearable. I want to go home! Veronique heard sobs between gasps, and a tuft of mousy hair appeared. Hurry! Joe wriggled onto the ledge, and they quickly shared the line between them. Now, Sam! The rope snapped taut, and the pair grimaced. Thankfully, he did not take long to crest the ledge, and took over from Veronique as she rushed towards the edge to find Fedor. Go, go, go! Fedor had his back to the wall, distracted by movement in the water on every side. "Look out!" Joe shouted. There was a tremendous splash on the far side of the cave, and the boy started. Another followed, and the snakes began to drift towards the disturbance. It was all the invitation Fedor needed, surging for the rope. "It worked!" Joe laughed, kneeling beside Veronique. He flung a final projectile into the seething mass. "I hate snakes, filthy beasts!" He laughed manically. Noticing her look, he shrugged. I laugh when I'm nervous. "Spasibo!" Fedor splattered down on the ledge beside them, panting as the others explored the area. "Over here!" Joe had found a small alcove. With a groan, the Russian got to his feet. "What is it?" Sam asked. They all stared at Joe, and, startled by the fast-rising water behind them, he stuttered, It looks like a brain teaser," he gushed. "A tile puzzle. You have to slide 8 slates around 9 spaces until you complete the picture. It must be a clue to what we do next." Fedor was in a black mood after his narrow escape. "Just smash it up and put it back together." Sam shook his head. "Doubt we can cheat. Try to figure it out. We'll look for a way up." Joe was already fiddling with the pieces. "We need a key to help with the pattern." "I'll look," Veronique said. Nicky, the explorer. Not far below, the waters churned. "Found something!" Veronique called, indicating the pile of stones near the rope. "They're Roman numerals." She turned one over. There was a pattern underneath. "I put them in order, but there are 3 missing." Joe seemed cross at first, then paled. "Oh no." He looked towards the ledge and then back at the pile of stones. "I didn't realize. I just threw them." "Well, there's nothing we can do about that now," Sam said. "Can you solve it without them?" "It'll take more time," the boy said, uncertain. The water was now a few feet from the base of their refuge. "Better hurry then," Fedor muttered. "Time is running out." Joe dashed back to the puzzle. The water was soon lapping at the ledge. "Try that one." Veronique had been standing over Joe's shoulder, helping for some time. The boy sighed, but moved the tile. "I've got it!" "You're welcome." Veronique looked annoyed. "No, I've realized what I've been doing wrong." His fingers raced around the board in a different direction. There was a click, and the stone behind the puzzle rolled away. Inside was a stout lever beside a small stone disc. "Well done!" Veronique patted Joe on the back. The boy picked up the coin-shaped stone, turning it over. Fedor gave the lever a firm tug, and a rope ladder unfurled from the gloom. The second ledge was larger than the first. Its floor was divided into a board of squares, each marked by a carving. Sam placed the ball of his foot on the closest square. It sank under his weight. He withdrew his foot, relieved when the slab returned to its original position. Maybe they could run across it. Seemed safe enough. "Wait," Fedor said. "There must be a catch." Veronique pointed to another mural on the wall, too far away to read. The only way to reach it was across the unstable chessboard. "I hope that's not the key," Joe laughed, his anxiety returning. "Why put the puzzle in the way? Why not put it over here?" Sam shook his head. Fedor bent to examine the stones. "We're meant to work it out. Those 2 stones are the same. So are those. One of us has to get across." Sam stepped forward. "I'll go." "No," Joe said, still feeling outdone by the first puzzle. "Let me try to figure it out." Veronique started pulling up the rope ladder. "Here, if anything happens, hold tight." Joe laughed again. Okay, got to start somewhere. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the checkered floor, choosing one of Fedor's stones. It sank down an inch or two, but, thankfully, no more. He looked for the same marking and took another step, giving the others a reassuring thumbs up when nothing happened. The next stone, a new design, was not so forgiving. This time, the square sank onto a button. Click. Water began to gush from the mouths of 3 other statues. Joe spun about, swearing. "Keep going!" they shouted over the pounding waterfall. 3 more careful steps saw Joe clear of the squares. The mural showed a bird's-eye view of the ledge and the board. Fedor was right. Most stones had a twin. They were, however, 4 that were not paired. One of these could trigger the way out, or shut off the water, or speed up their deaths if he was wrong. Turning back to the board, he made his way over to the closest odd symbol and gingerly stood on the square. It sank, and he felt it click. Gripping the rope ladder, he awaited his fate. Nothing happened. Still alive. Result. He started to move, but tripped and accidentally landed on the square next to him. This time, the stone fell away. Joe threw his arms out, dropping the ladder and pedalling backwards. The others rushed forward, but he steadied himself and held up his hands. Think! 4 markings. 4 people. He made the connection and formed a theory. They had to each make their way to a singularly marked stone, using the paired stones as a pathway. When all 4 were down, the puzzle would be solved. "I got it!" he shouted over the noise of the waterfall. "I hope," he added under his breath. Veronique went first, nodding to the boys when the button beneath her stone clicked into place. Sam followed, and Fedor wasted no time making his way to the final stone. Beside the mural, a hatch popped open to reveal a narrow staircase and a second stone coin. The third ledge was perilously small. 4 sturdy levers protruded from the wall. All were in a down position. "Right," Joe said, studying them closely to distract himself from vertigo. "This looks simple enough." He bent to lift the first lever. "Wait!" Fedor shouted. "Let's grab hold of something first." Sam saw Joe's cheeks darken. "Good thinking," he agreed. "Keep hold of each other too." Using all his strength, Joe managed to lift the lever. High above them, a knotted rope unfurled several feet from a winch in the wall. When he let go, however, the lever crashed to the floor, and the whole ledge moved slightly, retracting into the wall. "Whoa! The rope's gone!" Veronique cried, pointing upward. "We have to try keep the levers up," Sam said. Joe shook his head. "They're too heavy." 4 people, 4 levers, Fedor noted. "It has to be done at the same time." Veronique did not look convinced. "If you're wrong, we could fall." Sam shrugged. "And if we don't get off this ledge soon, we'll be swimming with the snakes." "We have to try," Fedor agreed. "Veronique, will you be able to lift one?" "I can't hold it." Joe looked pained. He was not built for this. Books were his bag, not brawn. He fought off nervous laughter. Sam's brow furrowed. "Fedor and I will each lift a lever. You 2 can keep them up with your shoulders whilst we tackle the last 2. Fedor nodded. "Good plan." With a grunt, the boys worked until the final pair clicked into place, and the winch unravelled the rope completely. The end was dangling just out of their reach. "It's too far out," Joe cried. "We're going to have to jump for it." Sam edged backwards, the water centimetres away. With a deep breath, he dashed forward, and like a monkey leaping for a vine, arched his body towards the dangling length, grasping it and swinging wildly out over the flooded cavern and through the waterfall. Veronique was next, and came very close to missing the pendulum entirely, before hurrying, hand over fist, towards safety. "Now you!" Fedor pressed himself against the wall to let Joe past. "OMG!" the boy stammered. The end of the rope was now in snake-infested water. "Now!" Fedor snapped. "Or we're both in deep water. Literally!" Joe fussed, rubbing his sore hands. I can't." "Yes, you can," Fedor forced a smile. "Go!" He gave the boy a clap on the back. Joe bolted. He jumped too soon and soared across the empty space, certain to fall short. Fortunately, Sam gave the rope a sharp flick and sent it spinning towards Joe's outstretched arms. "Quickly!" Veronique called down. Scaly bodies were rising out of the water toward him, but Joe was frozen stiff, clinging to the rope. There was nothing for it. Fedor was going to have to jump, and hope he did not send them both hurtling into the murky depths. His swollen ankle protested at the first lunge, but he put the pain from his mind, focusing on Joe and the spot of rope above him. He had to reach it. The jump was good. Fedor grabbed the rope and wrapped his legs around Joe. He could hear the boy crying, hands white, jaw clenched, his eyes clamped shut. "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." "Joe!" Fedor bent towards him. "Giuseppe! I've got you. Come on, we can do this. Together." Joe opened one red-rimmed eye. "Come on!" Fedor pulled himself up, letting his legs dangle so that the youngster could move. "Let's get out of here." Joe sniffed, then laughed involuntarily. He unclenched his fist and edged slowly towards Sam and Veronique, who waited above him, arms outstretched. "Was there another coin?" Joe collapsed on the ledge, snot running freely. Sam held it up. "Yup, got it. That's 3. "I can't do this anymore," Joe moaned, holding his aching arms. And Veronique nodded. The ordeal was taking its toll. Nicky the weary. Sam was furious at the peril they had all been placed in, but now was not the time for anger. "We must be close to the end," he said, trying to sound positive. "Nearly out of here, wherever the hell here is." Fedor was pacing, looking for clues. "There!" pointed Joe, still on his back. They followed the line of his shaking finger. Suspended from the ceiling, on a thin cord, a final stone coin spun slowly. It was too far over the water to grab. Sam swore. "How on earth are we going to reach that?" "Maybe we could use the rope?" Veronique sounded vague. Fedor shook his head. "The slightest movement could send it into the drink, and I don't fancy going after it." Sam stared at the elusive disc. Joe broke the silence. "What's been the main theme in all these puzzles?" "Us. Working together. How could 4 people reach that coin?" Veronique snapped her fingers. "Monkey chain." Nicky the genius. #winning. Joe applauded weakly. Fedor rolled his eyes and turned to the wall. A dusty iron ring was barely visible. "There!" Grabbing it, he stretched out to Sam, who took his wrist and extended his arm to Joe. "No," Veronique said. "I'm stronger." She slipped her cool hand around Sam's wrist. They were now at the edge. The water was closing in. "Don't look down," Sam heard Veronique whisper to Joe when she took his arm. Joe leaned out, accepting his inevitable death, certain he would slip into the murky waters. He stretched onto his toes, his fingers waggling. Sam watched him make every attempt to lengthen his body. Ever so slowly, the boy edged towards the coin, swaying seductively in front of him. So close now, so close. One moment, the tips of his fingers brushed the coin, and the next he was plummeting towards the blackness. Joe hit the water with a tremendous splash. He kicked his arms and legs, fighting to get to the surface before slimy coils could drag him to a suffocating doom. He breached the pool just below the statue's mouth, which spat unrepentantly upon him. The others were on what was left of the last ledge, shouting and reaching towards him. Sharp teeth sank into his leg, and Joe screamed. A long, muscular body bashed against his back, and he kicked at it, thrashing in the water. Another buffeted him from the other side. He kicked and clawed. His outstretched hands were so close. Just a few more kicks. Then they vanished, as a long body wrapped around his leg and dragged him under. Joe was overcome with terror. Water filled his mouth and throat as he screamed. He hadn't even begun to live. All the books and studying had been for nothing. Bella flashed through his mind. He should have kissed her. Strong hands gripped his. Something struck the coil around his thigh, and suddenly he was free and rising toward the surface. A firm arm was dragging him to safety. More hands found him, and Joe felt himself lifted from the water. Worried faces peering down as he retched. Familiar faces. "Joe!" someone shouted. Was that his name? His head rolled from one face to the other. How did he know them? He lifted a clenched fist and then opened it to reveal a small stone coin pressed into his palm. Then he fainted. "You got it!" Veronique shrieked. "Joe! Joe!" She shook him, but the boy was out cold, blood oozing from a nasty bite on his leg. Sam dropped his head to Joe's chest and listened. "He's breathing. He's okay, I think, but he won't be for long. We need to get out of here. Guys, any ideas?" Fedor pointed to a set of rings buried in the ceiling. "They lead to the top of the statue." "Monkey bars." Veronique stood up. "I can do this." She held out her hands for the coins. "Just lift me up." Nicky, the acrobat. Fedor looked at her, and then at Sam, who was still kneeling beside Joe, soaked to the bone. His bravery had impressed the young Russian. Sam had hit the water seconds after Joe had slipped beneath the surface, with no regard for his own safety. He waited for a response. Sam handed Veronique the coins. "Allez." Fedor lifted her toward the first ring. Gripping it, she hung there, sizing up the distance. Then, with a flick of her hips, Veronique began to swing backwards and forwards. She let go with a faint cry and lunged forward. Just 2 rings separated her from the statue, close enough to make out the slots in its neck, and she swung again. 1 to go. Her arms had begun to ache, and cramp threatened to paralyze her raw fingers. But, taking a deep breath, Veronique made the final lunge. Her fingers gripped the statue, and she slipped. "No!" she heard the boys cry above the din. "Not like this!" she moaned, plummeting towards gaping jaws. Cold stone brushed her palm, and Veronique snapped her fingers closed, halting her descent on the statue's ear. She laughed. She could not help it. Joe's nervous malady appeared infectious. "Are you okay?" came a shout from the ledge. "Oui," she whispered to herself. "Yes!" This time a shout. Summoning her last ounce of strength, she worked herself upright. The slots were within reach. With great care, Veronique drew the first coin from her pocket. She heard it rattle and roll into the statue, tripping some mechanism within. The column of cascading water slowed. "It's working!" she shouted over her shoulder. The torrent of water waned further with the second coin, and the third saw the deadly torrent subside to a trickle, and then, to their relief, it stopped. "You've done it!" came a cheer from the boys. "The last one should open the drain." As Veronique worked the final token free of her pocket, It caught on a stud in the denim and slipped from her fingers. She watched in horror as it spun away. No! With her legs locked in place, Veronique quickly fell backward like a trapeze artist throwing herself into the path of the falling coin. The desperate act paid off, and she snatched it moments from it disappearing into the water. Nicky the Magnificent. Sam slumped to his knees. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Nor me, Fedor muttered. You okay? He shouted to Veronique, who still hung upside down. No. Fair enough. She clambered back to her perch and, with a defiant whoop, slammed the final coin into place. There was a gurgling sucking sound, followed by a surge of bubbles, and finally the dreaded water began to recede. Quick! Fedor shouted. You need to get back before the water gets too low. Otherwise, if you fall... Veronique wiggled around to face the row of metal rings. Salvador D'Angelo let out a sigh when the girl landed in Fedor's arms. The large far-side window in his office was tuned into the cave feed, captured by levy orbs, small camouflaged floating cameras. The gripping real-time action was streaming to both Mr. D'Angelo's office and to the quarters of their very concerned trainer, Jenny MacLeod, who had been completely against the trial by water. Salvador turned to smile at his guest and refill their glasses. The head of the council had already made his opinion quite clear, and now regarded his host's presentation shrewdly. You're a gifted operations director, Gabriel had told him earlier that afternoon, and you'll get all the credit if this apprenticeship pays dividends. But it'll also sit squarely with you should anyone be hurt or killed. They watched as Jenny and Gen C rushed to help the battered youngsters. Fedor and Sam lifted Joe, and together the group made their way through a door at the top of the chamber. The feed ended, and the window returned to the peaceful view of a Swiss mountaintop. Salvador could hardly conceal his smugness. An impressive performance. Indeed, Gabriel seldom wasted his words. They showed promise. I'll keep an eye on their progress. He rose and walked towards the door. As he did, a dark-skinned man with scarred cheeks emerged from the shadows and followed him from the room. The door clicked shut, and Salvador swore. Where did he come from? I didn't see him coming here, sir. He's a bloody ghost, Owen said from his post by the door. More like the Grim Reaper, Salvador snorted. Bade had always protected the head of the council, and his reputation was legendary, but his presence left a chill in the air. I thought Sam did well, sir. They all did, didn't they? Wasn't Fedor a surprise? He may have the family muscles, but there's a lot more going on upstairs. This could be an intriguing summer, Owen, my boy. Very intriguing indeed.